Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of r/ProRevenge. My name's Ryan, the official host here on Reddit Voice, and I look forward to bringing you guys today's top stories. Before I do though, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button, as well as make sure you got notifications turned on, that way you could stay up to date with all the latest and the greatest. Best mate gets fired and blamed for theft. I kill my boss's business. Bit of backstory. My boss owns two bakeries. One earns more than the other, and the other has essentially been disowned. It makes a small amount of bread, and I'll get to that later. So I work as a baker in a well-known baking franchise chain in Australia. I've thoroughly enjoyed it until fairly recently when a coworker leaves after having a child, and a replacement is brought in. Oh boy, this replacement. This guy is King Dick, the biggest knob I've ever had the displeasure of working with. And within about 2 months, I've essentially exiled to the shit store. I've never worked there before, so I was honestly dreading it for a while, and this new guy had been running everyone into the ground and dug his roots into the place so hard, he had gotten into the boss's ear fairly well. I get to the sister store, and I was honestly dumbfounded. The production was small, and it was generally a joke at the main store. It wasn't hard to figure out why. Half of the oven didn't have power or simply had busted elements, not allowing it to heat up. The mixing bowl screamed whenever it was turned on, signaling it needed its bearings replaced urgently. The retarder/provers had gigantic gaping holes in them and pooled with water on the daily, and the other baker that was there, who we'll call Steve, had had enough. Steve had been there for about 3 years and wasn't even aware that King Dick had been hired. He knew him well though. It turned out that Steve and King Dick were both apprentices at the same store before King Dick was fired for theft. You can all see where this is going from here. I worked at the sister store for about 6 months doing the Easter season with Steve, and it was gruesome. Trays weren't replaced, some had breaks in them, I don't even know how it's possible, and provers leaked constantly, requiring mopping halfway through a shift, and because the non-slip floor, which was so old it was dangerously slippery, had so many breaks in it, the place smelled of dirty, moldy water that no one could get to, because it would get under the non-slip floor covering. It was foul. About 3 months in, I got some bad news. Josh, a good friend of mine at the main store, had been sacked. Money had gone missing from the store, and it was upwards of $3,000 over the course of a few months. There was no evidence it was Josh, but it didn't matter. King Dick got into the boss's head, and slowly but surely, Josh was warned for the most trivial of things, all of which weren't even his doing. He was fired after his third unfair strike. He would be taking him to Fair Work Australia. But I had bigger plans. First step was to walk inside the provers with my phone, take it out of my pocket, and take a nice photograph of the floor. Photo can be shown upon request. My next step was to make a fake complaint during a hot day to head office about the store I was currently working at, pretending to be a customer. I demanded to know how a place could be so filthy and not anything be done about it for so long. I told them it reeked of damp mold, which it did in the hot days. We kept fans on and an air conditioner blowing toward the customers constantly just so they wouldn't smell it. They said they'd get back to me, and I told them not to bother as I wasn't shopping there again. The third step was to report them to WorkSafe, the government safety board for workers. I requested to remain anonymous and attached the photo. I told them all about the faulty ovens, the dodgy mixing bowl, and also told them that there were other problems in the main store. But as I hadn't been there for months at this point, I couldn't say where that was. But I did mention that the drain cover was in the back and it had come loose one week, and boss informed us to just put it back so nobody breaks their ankle. I never actually fixed the problem, so it still came out from time to time, if you stepped on it or rolled over it wrong in the bin. They came into the sister store and shut it down within 20 minutes. There was a slew of problems, probably more than I reported. The place was a disaster zone, and it was clear they weren't effing around. I had a couple of days off and found out during those days that the main store was also shut down as they found rust around the inside of and mold growing inside the fans of the retarder, effectively throwing mold spores all over the products meant for the next day. Both places were shut down, and it was going to cost the boss tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in replacing machinery, flooring, and fines. The boss blamed Josh for all of this, mostly because King Dick shoved it all onto him, but if he got his facts right, he wouldn't have lost his business. Everyone working there was paid a severance package, including King Dick, but at least I know I won't be working with him again. I'd rather shish on my hands and clap. Edit. There's the picture I took. Note the small pool of water behind me on the right, and the rust up the top near the pipe. Edit 2. Wow, okay, this got bigger than expected. I'm new at my job now, but I'll respond to everything in about 9 hours or so and explain a few things that are popping up in the comments. For the record, Josh's legal case is still ongoing. Edit 3. FAQ and last edit until the legal case gets settled. Was this Brumby's delight? I don't think I'm allowed to say which one, based on the subreddit rules, but I will say I was looking for work at Brumby's after this. What's a retarder/prover? A prover is essentially a hot, humid room to activate the yeast and make the bread dough rise. A retarder does the same thing, but also acts as a fridge, keeping the yeast from being active until we want it. This allows us to make tomorrow's dough today and bake it tomorrow. It saves a lot of time. What happened to King Dick? Why isn't this revenge to him? I couldn't do anything to King Dick. I was working in the sister's store 20 minutes away. As for what happened, I wish I knew. I'd like to imagine that having 3 bakeries in such a short period of time get rid of him, plus his criminal record of being a thief makes it difficult for him to find work. What happened with Josh? A legal case is still ongoing. He's found work since that happened though, got a better wage than I do. Actually, I'm honestly kinda jealous. Why didn't you say something about the horrible store earlier? Well, I needed work desperately when I first started, and I was primarily working in the main store for a long time. The store was fairly well maintained, except for things that I took as being minor. You don't break your ankle on the grade unless it was deliberate, and TBH, it was an easy fix if the boss really wanted. When I was transferred to the sister store, I took it as essentially being on notice, and was fearing for my job. Looking back, I wasn't okay with it then, and not really okay with it now. That being said, bakers know bakers. If I said something, it wouldn't be long before I was out of the industry for good. I would never be able to find work as a baker again if word got out that I had reported the workplace. I essentially chose my job security and a living wage. I'm not going to say I'm in the right here, but I don't think there's any bakery or baker that's flawless. I guarantee if you buy bread from a dedicated bakery regularly, there's a solid 70% chance you've eaten food that's been dropped on the floor, brushed off with someone's hand, and thrown back up for sale. Customer is not always right in my field. I'm an ASE certified mechanic. I've been wrenching for 22 years. This story happened way back when I was still in oil change tech and learning my way. This customer comes in one day and wants us to take a look at his brakes and put some pads on the car that he brought. The shop manager had me bring in the car to take a look at it. I pulled the car into the shop and it's grinding real bad when I hit the brakes. I know it's more than a pad job. So the car goes up, the tires come off, and sure enough, he let his brakes go for so long that there is no more brake surface on the rotors. He had wore them down to the cooling fins in the middle of the rotor. I, of course, told my manager. Well, he told the customer, a crotchety old man, the situation, and explained that he needed new rotors. We even took him out and showed him there's really no rotor left at all. Naturally, the guy gets super pissed, says we're just trying to get more money out of him. We better just do what he wants or he's going somewhere else, blah blah blah. My manager takes it all as cool as a cucumber. When the dude was finished, my manager did the neatest thing I have ever seen at the time. He very calmly explained that the vehicle needed to be repaired correctly or he would red flag the car as it was unsafe to drive. Old boy looked like he was gonna explode. Threatened to call the cops if we didn't return his vehicle. We were just crooks, whole 9 yards. My boss told him it's cool and that he'd call them for him. Called in the state highway patrol, showed him the car in front of the customer, and they looked at him and said the car's unsafe for the road. He either fixes it correctly or has to tow it out of the shop if he wants to go somewhere else because they will not let it in the road. Sad thing is, he ended up paying to have it towed out a few days later, which I'm sure cost more than the $40 for new rotors. I don't know if he got it fixed right or not. Most wrenches out there want your car to be safe. We run on the same roads. I didn't know at the time, but I do now that we do have the authority to lock your car down if it's completely unsafe for the road until it's fixed correctly or towed somewhere to get it fixed correctly. I love what I do because I make the road safer. I also work in a field where, no, the customer is not always right. Old man learned that the hard way. A few others in my career have as well. Put deployed maintainers in a lose-lose? Well, now you lose. This happened a few years back while I was active duty as aircraft maintenance. Our rotating shifts were about 40 people. To get our aircraft, it was about a 20-minute drive to pass 2 checkpoints and get on a flight line. It was not possible to walk through. Checkpoints and flight lines were non-walkable. Now, when a unit deploys, you get a grab bag officer and senior leadership. This is either really good or really bad. The trip was really bad. We had an officer that was desperately looking for a promotion and a senior that only cared about himself and making his leadership happy. His job is usually to take care of the troops that are under him. We had 7 trucks to take us out to the aircraft, and all of them were worn thin. They'd been in the desert environment and worked hard their whole life, and many had duct tape handles, spliced wires, torn up walls, and you name it. On top of that, the sand had permanently stained them into an ugly light brown color. When they wouldn't run, we'd turn them in to be fixed, but everything else we'd make work to do the job. One day, the officer's boss dropped in to visit the peons. He was bothered by the ugly color of the vehicles and disgusted by the cosmetic looks of the interiors. After talking to the maintainers, he settled down and understood the situation. The officer and senior were with him during the walkthrough and heard his complaints and saw him relax and understand. Once he left, we were all called into a meeting. Our leadership demanded we turn in our vehicles for any damage at all that they had, even scratches, and that he would personally give us paperwork for any section that had a damaged or dirty vehicle. He wouldn't listen to reason, as even our QA guys were fine with the vehicles, and we had no liability. Burned, ignored, and chastised, we walked out to get the vehicles and catch the aircraft that was landing in 30 minutes. Senior followed us out with paper towels and cleaning products and demanded we make the vehicles white before we left. We couldn't convince him otherwise, and catching the jet was more important, so everybody frantically tried scrubbing the trucks. Nothing was changing. They truly were permanently stained. Time was short, and we had to leave that second, and the senior started screaming at one of the maintainers and grabbed a rag and cleaner, stood on his truck, and tried to scrub it as we were rushing to get out to the line. The truck stayed, and we had enough people to barely make it out and catch and bed down the aircraft. While out on the line, we all got together and wrote down every single scratch and issue on the remaining 6 vehicles. I'm talking discoloration, scratches, smells, everything. Each vehicle had a laundry list of 80+ items. Our vehicle maintenance would take a week and a half to get a vehicle back to us for an oil change, so we knew we wouldn't see these again for about 6 months. Some items would make the vehicle unusable, such as a broken window that couldn't close or a broken AC, that we simply dealt with just to meet the mission. This means vehicle maintenance would not be able to release or return them once turned in until they were fixed. Returning from the line, we dropped all 6 vehicles off at vehicle maintenance and then walked back to our unit. Sitting in the parking lot in a screaming match with the maintainer and the only remaining vehicle was our senior still holding a rag. He'd been yelling and scrubbing for hours. We told him we turned in all the vehicles and needed him to turn the last one in. We also let him know that we were told not to expect the vehicles back for a few months due to the extensive work on them and the low priority on cosmetic damage. He nearly had a stroke. His face turned red and he ran inside to the officer. As we were finishing up the list of damages on the last vehicle, our officer and senior walked out. Senior looking like a beaten dog. The officer apologizes for the short-sighted threats and said he had tried to get the vehicles back, but they could only release 3. The officer and senior had their own personal vehicles to get to work and could be driven on the flight line. They had no choice but to give us the keys so we could get our guys to and from work and out to the aircraft. For the remainder of the deployment, officer and senior had to use the base buses and walk nearly a mile in the desert heat just to get to work as their schedule was skewed 2 hours from ours. I assume they didn't pursue another vehicle as they didn't want to look bad to the big boss who was fine with the cosmetic damages. The maintainers took turns driving the nice cars leadership gave us, and seeing the senior show up half an hour late covered in sweat always raised morale. TLDR, leadership sacrifices mission for cosmetics, has to sacrifice their own comforts to cover their ass. And there you have it, folks, the end of the epics. If you liked this video, be sure to leave a like as well as subscribe with notifications turned on, that way you could stay up to date with all the latest and the greatest. As always, my name's Ryan, the official host here on Reddit Voice, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.